Hi, I'm Dr. Charles Shinaver. Welcome to Fit Families TV. Today, Ashley, who's a senior in college and is going to go to graduate school, has some questions for me.
So, how does being a psychologist affect you as a dad?
So, are you worried about messing up your kids?
A little bit. You've got to have a fine line. I'm sure
Absolutely.
there is.
I've been concerned about that myself. And one of the things it forces you to think about as a dad is wanting to do a good job with your kids, wanting to not mess up your kids, but also dads want to get stuff done right now and they want solutions to problems. And as a psychologist, you're trained to sort of step back and analyze data and be very skeptical and think through things. And so there's a little bit of a tension when you have both in one role.
Okay. So, when you have a son with ADHD, right?
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that. What was that like to find out, and what did you and your wife decide? How did you decide to handle that, I guess?
Sure. Because I'm a psychologist and I'm actually a child psychologist, part of my role in our family is to seek out solutions for things like this. And one of the issues was he was diagnosed very early.
Okay.
And at that point I had to deal with, what are the solutions? And at the time, medication was the primary solution.
Okay.
And so that's kind of one of the routes that we went, and that's kind of how we thought about it. But as we talk about this, I got more and more uncomfortable with that over time.
So you and I, as one of your interns, I'm a Cogmed coach, and you found Cogmed, but I kind of came into the picture when you'd already been doing it. How did that all come about? How did you find Cogmed?
Right. Good question, because I'd done a lot of different things to help my son.
Right.
What happened was I'd given a talk really about 2 years ago, and a school counselor got a hold of me and sent me an email saying, hey, have you heard of this Cogmed thing?
Okay.
I have a family that is interested in doing it, but I really want to get your opinion on how to do it. And so for me, the psychologist in me sort of steps back and is skeptical, and so I have to look at the research. And so I started to do that process I do as a psychologist. So I looked at the research, and I was first impressed by the fact that the founder is a guy who's an MD Ph.D., and his original research included functional MRI. And so what he found was that when they did their intervention, before and afterwards, they found a difference in brain functioning based on a functional MRI, which is very unusual research for a psychologist. That impressed me. What also impressed me is that there's several MDs and PhDs on the founders of Cogmed. And so I began to look at their research, and it's very compelling research. It's placebo-controlled, double-blind. So the double-blind means, as you know, as an undergrad, no one knows who gets the intervention.
Yeah.
The placebo-controlled meant, in this case, that people got the program, but it didn't adjust for difficulty. And what they found is that if the program didn't get more difficult, the kids didn't get better.
Okay.
And so all that together to me was very impressive on a research level. So I sent an email back saying, hey, I think it's a very good program. I'm impressed with it. But I was so impressed with it, I thought, I should probably be doing that with my son.
Right. And so is that how everything started with you trying to get involved with Cogmed? Is that
that's kind of how my sort of story with Cogmed started. But the story about everything I've done with my son is a much longer story.
Right.
And it begins back really more in behavior management. So something that you take as an undergrad. But with behavior management, one of the best authors out there for behavior management is Russell Barkley, and he has a book called Taking Charge of ADHD.
Okay.
The thing about this book is it's very difficult to do this kind of parenting. It's exhausting, basically. You have to really be on top of your game in terms of consequences and kind of looking ahead and making sure you know what's coming and how they might react and have everything ready. So you know what I'm talking about?
I've done therapy with kids before, and it's so hard to control because the environment that you have to have is so specific, and there's almost no room for error. That to have that in a home with multiple kids is like, I couldn't imagine trying that.
Well, absolutely. And what you add to the mix is, on top of that, is you have a child who can't manage his own impulses.
Right.
So you're trying to create an environment that's so tight and controlled that he does a better job. The problem with that is, as you might guess, given that you've already had some experience with this, is that it's exhausting.
Right.
Okay, that's the biggest problem with it. The second problem with it is that with ADHD, there are two core problems. One is inattention, and one is a lack of inhibition or hyperactivity. The problem with behavior management is it doesn't affect those two core areas. So you never really get better on that. So once your child goes to school, they haven't done all that work that you did, and he's back to square one.
It's not consistent is what it sounds like.
Right. You can't transfer everything you did at home to the school. They're going to do things their own way.
Right.
So it doesn't transfer. That's the biggest problem. Now, the biggest positive is that as a parent, you learn what is effective as far as managing a kid with ADHD. And so that's a positive thing to learn the best practice as far as managing kids that way. The other thing that you learn that's very sobering is it's just not enough. So you're not done. So maybe you get much better at being a parent, but you're nowhere near done.
Right. Okay. So Then where did you go?
Well, then we went to medication. And this little saga is what a lot of parents go through. They try this and they try that. Well, the next step was medication.
Okay.
And the biggest upside with medication is that it's well researched for a short-term effect.
Right.
So those kids do pay attention better.
Right.
And they do sit still better when they take the medication. The problem is the medication wears off, right?
Right.
So then again, we're back to square one, and they're not behaving and they're not focusing. The other issues with medication is side effects. Mm-hmm. So with my son, who's a boy, he was not eating. As a result of not eating, he was losing weight. Then he's losing sort of an opportunity to grow, which matters a lot for any kid, but especially for boys. Right. So he's not growing. He's also having stomach aches and nausea and all these side effects. So the other big problem with medication is you always have side effects, pretty much. Then what I found out more recently as I went back to the literature is high school kids and college kids are now selling these drugs.
Right. We've talked about that.
Absolutely. We've done videos on that.
Just being around that, and you're right.
Right. So classmates of yours sell it, and they're trying to get it from each other and all that stuff, which when I was dealing with medication, I didn't have that problem yet because it hadn't blown up. But now that it's blown up, it's absolutely something I don't want to put my son in the middle of, the possibility of selling drugs to kids. So that was the other big problem with medication. And so what I found was that it was a short-term solution. He could pay attention better, but I kept thinking, what am I going to do, do this for a decade?
Right.
I mean, until he's 21, and then are we really done? So it was really unresolved. It was a short-term solution, but it wasn't a full solution.
So I know you explored EEG biofeedback with your son. What was that about?
It's a good question. It's a complicated approach
to
helping a person train their brain waves differently.
It sounds like it.
Yes, it's very sort of technical in that you have paste and wires and all this stuff. And so it's a complicated process, and it's very hard to hand the ball off to moms and dads at home. And I did it, and I found some effectiveness with it. And some parents will try it, but it's labor-intensive and complicated. And that's what it was, but I found some benefit from it.
Okay.
What I'm really excited about is discussing Cogmed because, in contrast to biofeedback, it's a very clean model. It's very tight. It's clear how long you do it. And the impact in terms of research is also very clear. So I'm really excited to talk about that on our next Fit Families TV.